Welcome to the Listen Up podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hey everybody, Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the Listen Up podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare. This episode is brought to you by Listen Up Hearing Center. I help patients to effectively treat their hearing loss so that they can remain independent and better connected with their friends and family. The reason I am so passionate about hearing loss is I lost my brother Robbie twice. First to his hearing loss from radiation, to his brain tumor, and then when he passed away. I only care for ears. I'm the E of ENT. I've taken care of tens of thousands of patients with hearing loss and performed over 10,000 ear surgeries. I'm the founder of Listen Up Hearing Center, and I'm author of a book of the same name, Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you want to learn more about that, go to listenuphearing.com. That's listenuphearing.com. We have a great guest today. It's Dr. Michael Page. He's an audiologist who has done a lot of different stuff. He's been in various employment, state, national leadership capacities. He's been the state association president, board chair for state licensure, the American Academy of Audiology ethical practice chair, an executive leadership role, as well as several adjunct faculty positions. His primary professional focus and interest is not only in pediatric care and cochlear implantation, but all aspects of audiologic practice, including ethical practice, professional boundaries, industry relationships, workplace or culture, eradicating workplace toxicity. Ton of topics to cover. We don't have all day to be able to do it, but great stuff. We're excited to have him here, and here's about his interests and perspectives on hearing care. Michael, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Glad to be here with you. Thanks for the introduction.
Tell me a little bit about your journey. The highlights into the world of hearing care and these types of things that you're interested in.
Sure. I started out my undergraduate and graduate degrees at Brigham Young University. I was originally from Las Vegas. Went to Utah for those parts of my education. Didn't think I would stay. I was convinced that I was going to work for Boeing International and do industrial audiology. And I can tell you that exactly the time and place when I found out that wasn't going to happen. But during my master's program, whom you know as probably Michael Savette, was a guest lecturer in our master's program at the time that evoked potentials were just kind of coming online. And to confess the age frame, that was around 1983. And I remember following him out to his car once and saying, he came to lecture on all aspects of all modalities of evoked potentials. And I was big-eyed and had my ears and enthusiasm totally engaged. And I said, I have to do that. I want to do that. And he said, well, send me your resume and your transcript. And one thing led to another. He was the chief of audiology at Primary Children's Medical Center in Salt Lake City at the time. Once my graduate degree finished, I moved to Salt Lake for what I thought was going to be a temporary journey. But it turned into a couple of years of tutelage under his hand for evoked potentials and interoperative monitoring and those kinds of things. One thing led to another. I never thought I would stay here, but we did. And it's been a great thing. There's more to that story, but that's essentially the beginnings.
Sure. For the audience, can you explain that evoked potentials? I mean, for some people, that's a natural thing, but for some, they don't get that. So it'd be great to explain that to them.
Sure. Evoked potentials, we primarily use evoked potentials, especially in audiology, as an auditory brainstem evoked potential or auditory brainstem response. There are probably 4 or 5 different acronyms for that test, but it's a way for us to assess the auditory pathway objectively without requiring a response, a hand raise or a yes or no or anything like that. And early on, evoked potentials became the go-to for screening newborn hearing. And at first we were into high-risk registers, but eventually we found even better ways to screen newborn hearing using otoacoustic emissions, et cetera. But essentially what we're looking for is by putting a sound in the ear and acoustic stimulation in the ear, we look for changes in the EEG and the averaged EEG of that process. And we know that our responses will change when we're stimulated acoustically. So in other aspects, we can do that visually. We can do that somatosensory wise, stimulating certain nerves electrically. But we use it for hearing and audiology as an objective measure of getting at the bottom of things very quickly. Early identification.
Yeah, no, it's great. So for the audience, it's kind of a way to pass it. Like you don't need the patient to participate. So you can imagine a newborn infant. You can't say raise your hand when you hear the beep, and so that's kind of what it was. And it was a a really groundbreaking technology because we didn't really have anything to do that. It led to the birth of exactly what you're saying, which is screening children for hearing loss, which is a whole another big topic, but is an amazing transformation in the treating of children and the identification and rehabilitation of children who are born hearing impaired. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that's
so
great.
that continued on. I really enjoyed that time at Primary Children's. I actually spent close to 18 years at Primary Children's. I eventually came back to Primary Children's as the manager of the implantables program, where we did cochlear implants, bone anchored devices, etc. And then I worked with whom you may know as Clough Shelton, who's the neurotologist who ran that program, recently retired, but he's a house trained physician surgeon that I learned so much from during that
No, I
time.
know Cliff well. Him and I both trained at the same place. He was obviously Cliff left. He left the house care clinic about a year or two before I arrived to do my fellowship.
Yeah, nice.
No, that's great. And so it sounds like you've had a broad. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. It sounds like the children's hospitals suck you back in over and over again, which is wonderful because I think it's a great area of care and hearing care. But so, what are some of the other things you're doing in the hearing space?
Well, after in that interim time frame between two stints at Primary Children's, I worked in industry and worked for Advanced Bionics for a number of years, doing clinical and surgical support. That was during the era of Advanced Bionics' numerous recalls. That was a very tumultuous time.
Sure.
I worked also for a few years with Cochlear Corporation, and then eventually became one of the vice presidents at Oticon Medical in the implantables arena as well. As you know, they're out of that space now, having sold out to Cochlear. But each one of those opportunities taught me a great deal in terms of just the general technologies, the depth of technologies. It's one thing to be a clinician and to see those and use those technologies. It's another thing to actually crawl under the hood and really be taught by the engineers who build those. And so that was a very, very useful time.
So I mean, I think that's great. So like, we're not going to be able to obviously go super deep, but like, so what are some of the overarching things you learned from that experience? I mean, I think that's a very rare to have somebody to jump from the clinical side to the upper management side is not common, as you know. So like, so what are some of the insights that you could provide?
Sure, I loved learning about the specifics of the devices themselves, and there clearly is under the hood. There's a very large difference between how devices are manufactured, how they process sound, how they stimulate within the cochlea, the numbers of electrodes versus the number of independent circuits. We can get into all those technologies, but there's clearly a difference. I think what's failed to emerge as much as we had all hoped is to see a dramatic difference in the outcomes of those
Clinically,
specific devices. And we don't. At times we thought we did, and we thought we were going to, and there were little hints of it here and there, and especially as we got into circuit or stimulation steering and all of that, and yet we've failed to see any great differences between the devices. I remember some of the early research that Charles Lim from UCSF put out, and one of his claims, I think still today, is that we were maybe a little bit off the beaten path to have only spoken language be our goal for cochlear implantation. And I think his maybe regret is that we should have actually had music be the goal for the outcomes of implantation, since music has a much more complex signal than spoken language. And one of his points, or in one of his TED Talks, was, if we had music
Language would be easy.
Language, yeah, be easy, just a byproduct that would happen. And I think we're all still hoping for that kind of technology to arise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, so true, but right, like if you need shelter, the tent is better than nothing. Obviously, a 3-bedroom house with 2.5 baths is better, but you got to get the tent built, and that actually is an amazing thing. Just the speech, but I don't disagree with you that there's a lot more to be done in terms of all of those processes. The comment I will make is, patients ask me to tell them which implant, and I tell them, pick whichever you want. And they go, well, why? I go, because exactly what you said. We don't have a demonstrable clinical outcome difference. And I say to them, I say, and if there was, I would feel an obligation to tell you. So the reason I'm not telling you is because it truly is no demonstrable difference. And that actually, I think, probably speaks more to how rudimentary these devices are and how much the brain and other things actually affect the outcome.
Sure. The other thing that came out of my work with the various aspects of industry is all the bells and whistles. And a lot of the industry leaders would want to basically sell you on the number of bells and whistles they have. And what we found clinically is that bells and whistles really may make a little slight difference here and there. And that's based on your preference for where you like to listen and what you like to listen to and how you like to hook up to things. But in the long run, those bells and whistles really weren't the key to success, even though they were sold in just fancy packages. So
Yeah.
and the research, really the research behind outcomes and all that has been very interesting. It's very interesting to be on the inside and watch research occur that would never be published.
Right. Well, I mean, that's only the research that shows what people want
Exactly.
that's actually published, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, my one comment about cochlear implant research, I don't think there's enough patient satisfaction research, because I think in the end, that's actually what should drive it. I mean, as well as I do, there are people who have terrible audiologic outcomes that are very satisfied, and there are other people who have amazing audiologic outcomes who are dissatisfied. And so there
Yeah.
is not necessarily a correlation between the two, but ultimately, you want the patients to be satisfied, because that's the measure, not, well, we think you're hearing well in noise. And their answer is, well, I don't think I'm hearing well in noise. So
Sure.
that's my one comment.
You might be interested in some research that came out of Utah State University by Dr. Laurie Nelson, a PhD audiologist, that did a survey, and I'm trying to remember the N. I think it was around 500 cochlear implant users, and I think it was 1 or 2% of those users surveyed said they regretted having a cochlear implant.
Yeah,
All of
well,
the others,
definitely. Well, the
wow,
other thing I think is fascinating, and I tell people who are in the process of getting a cochlear implant, that the company is people's religion, right? Like, so,
sure,
by example, there are multiple different religions, and each one of those religions think they're right.
sure,
And everybody who picked whichever company they pick, they think it's right, which is great, because what you don't want somebody thinking, I got this thing in my head and I picked the wrong one. That's terrible. And so it actually is another testament to everybody's happy with their outcomes, which is pretty amazing that there are multiple devices out there that people can pick from that give them about, the exact same difference or outcome.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
But yeah, and I would agree. I think the number of people, 1 or 2% is probably it. And what I would also say is those people actually, they'll say the implant, it's not that it doesn't work, it just didn't do what I thought it should do, which
Sure.
are two different things, right? Because the implants oftentimes work, but people aren't satisfied because they thought it was going to do more than perhaps, and that speaks to pre-implant counseling and the like.
And that
So,
1 to 2% tend to be the vocal minority, tend to be all the stories that are told by those antagonists in the deaf culture arena, on and on. This last week, I was interviewing a deaf inmate in a federal prison for a whole nother reason.
right.
One of the things he said is, "Oh, I'll never have a cochlear implant because I know of somebody who died." Well, I mean, in 35 years, I've not known of anyone who died, and yet that 1%, that one incident, is what flavors the entire experience for the
For
future
some. Yeah, yeah.
for some.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing. I mean, we don't need to go there, but I doubt when you went to audiology school, you thought you would be interviewing a deaf inmate in a federal prison.
I've interviewed 20 of them in the last couple of months. That's
Oh,
all
so
I've
you're
been
obviously
doing.
working on some sort of project in that.
Right.
That's so. What I mean, we don't have to talk about specific. So, what type of project you've not in you roll? It sounds like you're doing consultancy type stuff at this point.
Right. The last 5 years or so, I've really spun off on my own doing workplace culture types of consulting. But I've been roped into a few things, and it's turned into workplace culture issues. I recently, in the last year, went back to Cornell University and got a certificate in mediation and arbitration. I add that to the mix as well. But I've been hired by a number of institutions to come in and solve workplace toxicity issues. A year or so ago, I was brought back to a faith based university in the Midwest, and it was not a school of audiology, it was another healthcare professional school. And the university president said, come solve this, or we're going to fire them all and we're going to start all over again. These were 35 PhD level people that just couldn't
Wow.
pull it together. And I spent an entire year with them, which was part of the memorandum that I requested of them. But we did a 1 week mandatory training and really brought every individual back to a kind of a common ground, a common place. After that week's training, I had two individuals come up and say, I had no idea I was the instigator of all of this. And that department actually turned it around. We did a year's worth
Wow, that's great.
of kind of coaching with the dean and the vice provost of the university, and they're on a new trajectory. That really comes back to the basics of communication. And to start, you started out saying that the whole purpose of your practice is independence and keeping people in
Connection.
communication. And boy, that's the basic fundamental. Whether we're putting a cochlear implant in a child or whether or not we're haranguing a very highly qualified PhD level professional not to be toxic anymore. This is part of where it's all kind of funneling into the same outcome, and that is good communications, transparency, kindness, um, all of those kinds of things. So that's where I've spent the last few years now.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I mean, when I look back at my career, and I think many people get caught in this, right? Like at the beginning, you're just trying to learn how to do it, right? And how to technically do it. And
Sure.
then as you become more comfortable in that, then you start talking about kind of the more global purpose of what you're doing. I lost, I was do it, but it wasn't in the front of my mind. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Well, and to take that even further, I've even told myself a dozen times I never in my wildest dreams could have predicted my path.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, I think that's wonderful work. I wouldn't say that that's if you're going to paint the audiologic career path, I'm not sure people say, well, then you'll roll it into industry, work with the manufacturers, and then you'll be in toxic workplace mediation. Not probably. Uh,
Right.
but I mean, I can see how, a sensitivity or understanding about communication and the need for communication and how it is an essential part of humanity. And likely that's probably what, I mean, I obviously you don't need to get the specifics, but I suspect that's actually what you reestablished during that week was people actually understanding the communication rather than antagonizing people. It's communicating with people and realizing there's a common purpose, which not going to go there, but given the impending election, I think it would be applicable in that realm as well. But I don't want to go there at all. But you know what I'm saying, right? And so that might be a problem. That is a problem across humanity. Well, that's really wonderful that you've been able to, move that work, from, basically technical audiology to helping industry to helping beyond industry. I think that's a wonderful career arc that many people would be very enviable of.
Oh, thank you. I told my wife a number of times this is the first time in the last 5 years that I've really been able to use 38 years worth of experience in one conversation, if you will.
Yeah, well, that's great. And that's like the career arc, right? You're taking all of the different pieces, putting it together, and it's kind of like I mean, I'm not retiring you, but to be able to end up in a particular position where you're using all those skills, right? Because I mean, there are a decent number of people who acquire a bunch of skills and then they transform into another job, and unfortunately, all of those other skills
They go out the door.
are left behind, right? I mean, and so it's really wonderful to be able to use them. So, Michael, one of the questions I love asking everybody is, what's your favorite sound?
My favorite sound is running water. And I'm a water guy. I've swam Alcatraz twice. I love that outdoor stuff. And if I could sleep at night by an ocean or by a running river or stream, I'd be perfectly content.
Well, good. There was some clarification there. I was like, really? Like, go turn the sink on and that's good. But
Sure.
that isn't what you meant.
Yeah,
You meant
thanks for clarifying. Yep.
naturally running water, right? Not a drip.
Naturally running.
That's good. And so, Michael, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Sure. You can reach. I have a website. It's www.mdpage.org. And that's the best way to reach me. You can find me by email if you'd like at Michael, Michael, at mdpage.org. That's the best way to reach out. I'd be happy to hear from any listeners.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is in all honesty, usually at the end, I kind of go over what they're doing, but I would say, this is Michael Page, but he's been a fabulous pediatric audiologist. He's been an audiologist. He's worked in industry, and now he's working on workplace culture. So it sounds like a master of many, which is a really wonderful thing. So if anybody has any questions in any of those realms, we would, I'd encourage you to reach out, where he's very generous with his time with me. And it sounds like he's got great experience from his descriptor and doing really wonderful stuff. So, Michael, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your experience and perspective with us.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for doing this overall. I think it's a great opportunity for other individuals to get to know you, to get to know your expertise as well, and having guests and exchanging information. Everything good comes out of that.
Yeah, I love this because it just kind of goes wherever it goes, if that makes sense. Sure. There's no roadmap. It's just kind of, where does it take me? So it is wonderful. And you know what? I tell people this all the time. If you and I were to meet at a meeting, we'd probably have a 2 to 3 minute conversation and then go on, right? And so where do you get a chance to have a half-hour conversation uninterrupted, where you can really learn all of these things about people, right? And so I think it's a really wonderful format. But thanks for coming on. This has been a great episode. I appreciate your time, and we will talk to you later. Thanks.
Thanks so much, sir. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Listen Up podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.